Hello, and welcome back to our channel, the place where we uncover the forgotten stories of history, tales of justice long delayed, and of revenge served ice-cold. If you are a fan of these narratives, make sure you subscribe and click the notification bell because today's story, well, it will make you question the limits of loyalty, the genius of betrayal, and a revenge that didn't truly begin until after its architect was already in his grave. This is not the story of a man who sought vengeance. This is the story of a man who designed it, building a machine of retribution set to run on a timer, long after his own time had run out. This is the story of the Traitor's Testament. Part 1, A Covenant of Blood and Steel. London in 1888 was not one city, but two. There was the London of gaslit mansions and elegant Mayfair squares. And then there was the other London, the London of Whitechapel and the East End. A world of fog-choked alleyways, gin-soaked despair, and vicious ambition, where survival was the only law. In this underworld, a new power was rising. They weren't the largest gang, but they were the most disciplined and the most feared. The Beckworth Brothers. There were three of them. Arthur, the charismatic and iron-willed leader. Thomas, the ferocious fighter who served as the gang's muscle. And the youngest, Edward, the quiet, unassuming brother who served as its mind. Edward Beckworth was a man of shadows and ledgers. While his brothers ruled the streets with razors sewn into the peaks of their caps, Edward ruled the gang from a small, smoke-filled back office. He was the strategist, the accountant, the keeper of secrets. He knew every corrupt police sergeant, every dock worker on the take, every shipment that came into the port of London. He could chart the flow of money and power through the city's veins with the precision of a master cartographer. The Beckworth gang's success was built not just on his brother's brutality, but on Edward's silent, intellectual brilliance. Their operation was a family legacy, forged in the poverty of an orphanage. They were bound by an oath deeper than blood, a promise to be each other's fortress against a hostile world. Their greatest rival was a sprawling, ruthless organization led by a man named Alastair Finch, a criminal kingpin who controlled the city's smuggling rackets. The war between the Beckworths and the Finch gang was a bloody, attritional affair fought over warehouses, pubs, and territory. The key to the Beckworths' survival was their information network. And the heart of that network was a man named Julian Thorne. Thorne was not a gangster. He was a solicitor, a man of law who had found it far more profitable to serve the lawless. He was handsome, impeccably dressed, and possessed a silver tongue that could charm a judge or soothe a nervous gangster. Edward had recruited him years ago, seeing the value in having a man who could navigate the legitimate world. Thorne handled their legal troubles, set up their front businesses, and laundered their money. He was not just their lawyer. He was a trusted member of their inner circle, treated almost as a fourth brother. It was this trust that made his betrayal so devastating. Thorne was a man of immense ambition, and he grew tired of being a well-paid servant. He wanted to be a king. He began secret negotiations with the Beckworths' nemesis, Alastair Finch. The deal was simple. Thorne would provide Finch with the one thing that could destroy the Beckworths, their entire operational blueprint. In exchange, Thorne would be made a full partner in Finch's new, expanded empire. The betrayal was a masterpiece of professional duplicity. Over the course of a year, Thorne compiled a dossier. It was Edward's life's work, stolen and weaponized. It contained the locations of their safe houses, the names of their key informants, the schedules of their shipments, and, most importantly, the details of a massive, secret deal to import firearms that was meant to be the Beckworths' checkmate move against Finch. He created a testament to their destruction. Edward, with his mind for patterns, began to sense a leak. Small things. A police raid on a pub that was too precise. A key witness who suddenly vanished. He suspected a traitor, but his gaze fell on the lower ranks, never on the trusted solicitor who sat in their war councils. The trap was sprung on a foggy November night. Acting on Thorne's information, Finch's men tipped off the police about a gang war to create a diversion, and then hit every one of the Beckworths' key operations simultaneously. It was a perfectly coordinated citywide blitz. Arthur and Thomas were caught in an ambush at one of their warehouses. They fought back-to-back, a final, valiant stand, but were overwhelmed and gunned down. Edward was at a meeting with Thorne, finalizing the details of the firearms shipment. When the news reached them, Thorne feigned shock and horror. He helped Edward escape, leading him through a safe route that took him directly into the hands of Finch's waiting men. There was no grand confrontation. Finch looked at the captured architect of his rival's gang. "Your solicitor sends his regards," he said with a cold smile, before his men dragged Edward away. Edward Beckworth was not killed quickly. He was tortured for a week in a damp cellar, as Finch tried to extract any remaining secrets. But Edward's mind was a vault. He said nothing. He died in silence, his body eventually dumped unceremoniously into the Thames. The Beckworth gang was annihilated. Alastair Finch, with Thorne as his new right-hand man, became the undisputed king of London's underworld. The story of the Beckworths became a cautionary tale, a ghost story whispered in East End pubs. The matter, it seemed, was closed. But what no one knew, not Finch, not even Thorne, was that Edward Beckworth, the man who saw every angle, had always planned for the possibility of betrayal. For years, he had been quietly preparing a final, posthumous move. His death was not the end of his plan. It was the trigger. Part 2. The Testament of the Dead. A week after Edward's death, a letter arrived at the small, respectable law office of Mr. Alastair Reed. Reed was an elderly, semi-retired solicitor, known for his unshakable integrity. He had been Edward's first mentor in the law, long before he had turned to a life of crime. Edward had maintained a secret, sentimental contact with him over the years. The letter had been sent by Edward weeks before his death, with instructions that it only be opened upon the public confirmation of his demise. Inside, Reed found a key to a safe deposit box at a bank in the City of London and a set of detailed, cryptic instructions. Inside the box was not money or jewels, but a single, thick, leather-bound ledger. This was Edward's true masterpiece. For years, he had kept 2 sets of books. The first was the operational ledger for the gang. The second, this one, was his personal insurance policy, his Traitor's testament. The testament was a work of diabolical, intellectual genius. It was a complete financial and operational history of Alastair Finch's criminal empire. Edward, a master of intelligence, had spent years secretly mapping his rival's network with the same precision he applied to his own. He had documented Finch's smuggling routes, his money laundering schemes through legitimate-looking import-export companies, and, most damningly, the names of the high-ranking city officials and Scotland Yard inspectors on Finch's payroll. But the brilliance of the testament was not just in the information it contained, but in how it was presented. It was not a simple list of names and crimes. Edward had written it as a formal, legally structured last will and testament. He had framed the entire document as a bequest of information. The document began, "I, Edward Beckworth, being of sound mind, do hereby bequeath the following assets and liabilities, formerly the property of Alastair Finch, to the attention of the British legal system, in the event of my untimely death at his hand." He had turned his revenge into a formal, legal instrument. He had taken the 2 worlds he inhabited, the criminal underworld and the world of law, and fused them into a single, devastating weapon. The final part of Edward's instructions to Mr. Reed was the most crucial. The ledger was not to be turned over to the police, whom Edward knew were compromised. Instead, Reed was to make 3 copies. Copy 1 was to be sent to a specific, notoriously ambitious and incorruptible inspector at Scotland Yard named Frederick Aberline, a man known for his disdain of the department's internal corruption. Copy 2 was to be sent to the editor of the Pall Mall Gazette, a newspaper famous for its crusading, investigative journalism. Copy 3, and this was the masterstroke, was to be sent directly to Julian Thorne. This was the core of Edward's psychological revenge. He wanted Thorne to know what was coming. He wanted him to have the same information as the police and the press, to force him to live for a time in a prison of his own making, watching as the walls of his new kingdom closed in around him. He wanted Thorne to understand that he had not just been outfought. He had been outthought by a dead man. Part 3. The Ghost in the Machine. The arrival of the Traitor's testament threw the city into chaos. Inspector Aberline, armed with a roadmap to the corruption within his own department, moved swiftly and secretly, trusting only a small, hand-picked team of loyal officers. The Pall Mall Gazette began publishing a series of explosive articles, dripping out details from the ledger day by day. The stories of Finch's empire and his high society accomplices became the scandal of the decade, devoured by a public hungry for tales of corruption in high places. But the most profound effect was on Julian Thorne. He received the copy of the ledger and understood his predicament instantly. He was trapped. He was now a partner in an empire that was publicly and legally imploding. His name was tied to every one of Finch's crimes. His former master, Finch, was now his greatest liability. Finch, a creature of violence and intimidation, reacted to the pressure with predictable brutality. He began to eliminate anyone he suspected of talking, anyone who could corroborate the ledger's claims. His violent purge only served to confirm the truth of the newspaper articles. Thorne was paralyzed by a terror far colder than the fear of a gangster's bullet. It was the fear of a strategist who has been perfectly and completely outmaneuvered. He saw Edward's genius in every line of the ledger. He was a pawn in a dead man's game, and every possible move led to checkmate. If he went to the police, he would have to confess his own complicity. If he tried to flee the country, he would be hunted by Finch's men, who now surely suspected him of being the source of the leak. If he did nothing, he would be swept up in the inevitable mass arrests. Edward had not just exposed him, he had isolated him. He had turned Thorne's new partner, Finch, into his executioner. The endgame came a month later. Thorne, his nerves shattered, made a desperate move. He arranged a secret meeting with Finch, planning to betray him a second time by offering to testify against him in exchange for immunity. But Finch was not a fool. He knew his empire was finished, and he knew who had brought it down. The meeting was a trap. Julian Thorne's body was found in a back alley, not far from where the Beckworth brothers had been killed. He had died the way he had lived, a victim of the violent world he had so desperately wanted to master. A week later, Inspector Aberline's newly formed anti-corruption unit conducted a series of coordinated, city-wide raids. Armed with the irrefutable evidence from Edward's ledger, they arrested dozens of Finch's men, a handful of corrupt police officials, and Alastair Finch himself. Finch's empire, which had seemed so invincible just weeks before, was shattered beyond repair. Edward Beckworth's revenge was complete. From beyond the grave, his cold, intellectual plan had unfolded with the precision of a fine watch. He had not only avenged the murder of his brothers and himself, but he had cleansed the city of his greatest rival. He had used his enemy's own ambition to destroy him, and he had used the law, the very system his enemy sought to corrupt, as his ultimate weapon. The Traitor's Testament became a legend at Scotland Yard, a textbook case of how to dismantle a criminal organization from the inside out. And in the quiet, foggy alleyways of the East End, the story of Edward Beckworth was whispered with a new kind of reverence. He was the ghost in the machine, the quiet brother whose final move was his most brilliant, a testament to a legacy of loyalty that could not be broken, even by death.